Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're stepping into a fairy tale you were never meant to question. The life of a medieval princess. A world of castles and crowns that looks beautiful from a distance, but feels very different once you're inside. Tonight's story reveals why real princesses didn't dream of romance or adventure. They dreamed of warmth, privacy, and simply surviving another day behind stone walls. This is not a loud history lesson. This is a quiet journey into the parts of the past we rarely imagine. The cold nights, the endless waiting, the life lived on repeat. So before you get comfortable, take a gentle moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if these deep sleep history stories help you find peace, sleep better, or quietly reflect on our shared journey through time. And now, close your eyes, let the modern world fade away, and allow yourself to drift slowly into history. Close your eyes. Take a slow, steady breath, and let the noise of the modern world drift away. Tonight, we step back into medieval history. Not the version painted with glitter and romance, but the quiet, heavy truth that history rarely whispers. When most people imagine a medieval princess, they see silk dresses flowing through candlelit halls, soft music echoing off stone walls, and a life protected by power and privilege. But this image is an illusion, carefully crafted long after the Middle Ages had already faded into memory. In reality, a medieval princess was born into a world that felt less like a fairy tale and more like a beautifully decorated prison. From the moment she took her first breath, her life was no longer her own. Survival, not love, was the unspoken dream pressed into her existence. In this relaxing history sleep story, we peel back the fantasy and reveal what it truly meant to grow up as royal blood in a dangerous medieval world. Stone castles were cold and damp, even in summer, their walls designed to repel enemies rather than offer comfort. Illness traveled freely through these halls, and even royal children were never safe from disease. A princess learned early that beauty was not a gift, but a responsibility, and her body was not hers to protect, but a tool to secure alliances and peace treaties. While fairy tales teach us about true love's kiss, real medieval princesses were taught how to endure silence, obedience, and fear. Their education was not centered on dreams or desires, but on preparing for marriage to a man they had never met, often decades older, chosen not for kindness, but for land, armies, or political advantage. This dark history sleep narrative reminds us that childhood as we know it today barely existed in medieval society. A young princess was observed constantly, her posture corrected, her words measured, her emotions controlled. Any mistake reflected not on her, but on her entire bloodline. To disobey was not rebellion, it was danger. In a time where kingdoms rose and fell through violence, her marriage could decide whether thousands lived or died. At night, when the torches dimmed and the corridors fell silent, she did not dream of romance. She dreamed of survival, of making it through childbirth, which claimed the lives of countless noblewomen, of avoiding the invisible threats of poison, betrayal, or political manipulation. This is why medieval history for sleep must be told gently, honestly, and without illusion. Because behind every embroidered gown was a young woman carrying the weight of a kingdom on her shoulders. As you relax and allow this story to unfold, remember that the fairy tale was never meant for those who lived it. It was created for those who came after, longing to believe that the past was softer than it truly was. Tonight, we let go of that fantasy and rest in the quiet truth, where history speaks not in glamour, but in endurance, resilience, and the slow, steady rhythm of survival. As the night grows quieter, let us drift deeper into medieval history and rest our minds on a truth that is rarely spoken aloud. A medieval princess did not have a childhood in the way we understand it today. There were no years set aside for innocence, no long seasons of play or self-discovery. From the earliest moments she could walk and speak, she was trained to perform a role that had been assigned before her birth. In this relaxing history sleep story, we imagine her small footsteps echoing through vast stone corridors, watched by tutors, servants, and nobles who measured her value not by joy, but by potential. Every lesson she learned carried a hidden weight. Reading and writing were taught not for curiosity, but for correspondence and diplomacy. Music was practiced not for pleasure, but to display refinement. Even prayer was less about comfort and more about obedience. In a medieval world ruled by uncertainty and violence, control was safety and discipline was survival. This dark history sleep narrative reveals that affection was often distant, even within royal families. Mothers, frequently pregnant or lost to childbirth, were symbols more than sources of comfort. Fathers, burdened by wars and alliances, viewed their daughters as living promises to the future. Love, if it existed, was restrained, carefully managed, and rarely expressed openly. A princess learned early to hide her fears, to soften her voice, to bow her head at the right moment. Emotional restraint was praised, curiosity discouraged. Questions were dangerous because knowledge could lead to defiance. As she grew older, the walls seemed to close in, not physically, but socially and psychologically. Her body became a matter of public interest, monitored for signs of health and fertility. Her education shifted subtly from learning to waiting for a proposal from a foreign land, waiting for a decision made in council chambers she would never enter, waiting for a future she could neither choose nor refuse. In medieval history for sleep, this waiting is the quiet rhythm beneath every fairy tale illusion. It was during these years that a princess truly understood the meaning of the golden cage. She wore fine fabrics, but they weighed heavy with expectation. She lived among luxury, yet possessed nothing of her own, not even her time. Nights were often restless, filled with whispered prayers and unspoken worries. Would her marriage bring peace or war? Would she survive childbirth or become another name lost to history? These questions lingered silently, never voiced, never answered. As you relax into this story, allow the pace to slow and recognize that the fantasy of the medieval princess dissolves here in the stillness of her youth. There was no freedom in her beauty, no escape in her status, only preparation, patience, and the constant awareness that her life was not meant to be lived, but managed. This is why the fairy tale could never belong to her. It was born from distance, from imagination, from the need to soften a past that was far harsher than we like to remember. Tonight, we rest with the truth, letting it settle gently like a candle dimming in a stone chamber, illuminating not romance, but endurance. Now, as the night settles fully around us, let us arrive at the moment every medieval princess quietly feared, but could never escape. There comes a time when preparation ends and reality steps forward without ceremony. For a medieval princess, This moment often arrived suddenly, marked not by celebration, but by finality. The announcement of marriage was not a question, not a conversation, but a decree. In this relaxing history sleep story, imagine the hush that falls over the castle when her future is spoken aloud. The corridors seem longer, the walls heavier, the air thicker with meaning. She listens, calm on the surface, as if this moment had not been rehearsed in her mind for years, and in truth, it had. From childhood, she had been trained to accept this ending with grace. The golden cage, once spacious enough to allow illusions of choice, now closes completely. Her name becomes a political sentence, her body a bridge between kingdoms. Medieval history for sleep often softens this moment with images of grand weddings and jeweled crowns, but the truth is quieter and far more unsettling. She leaves behind the only world she has ever known, escorted not by love, but by obligation. The road ahead leads to a foreign court, a foreign language, unfamiliar customs, and a husband whose face she may have seen only in portraits, if at all. In this dark history sleep narrative, we must understand that fear was not weakness, it was awareness. She knew the risks that awaited her. Childbirth, expected quickly and repeatedly, was the most dangerous trial of all. Many medieval princesses did not survive it, their lives ending before they ever truly began. And yet, refusal was impossible. In a world where women's voices held little weight, a princess's silence was her duty. As the wedding day approached, rituals replaced reflection. Dresses were fitted, alliances celebrated, prayers offered for fertility rather than happiness. At night, alone in chambers that once felt familiar, she lay awake, listening to the sounds of a castle preparing to let her go. The illusion of the fairy tale dissolves entirely here. There is no rescue waiting, no sudden turn of fate, only acceptance, carefully cultivated over years of discipline. This is the final truth of the medieval princess's life. She was never meant to choose her destiny, only to carry it. As you rest with this story, allow the weight of history to settle gently, not as sorrow, but as understanding. The fairy tale was created to comfort those who never lived this reality. For the princess herself, survival was the only dream she was allowed to keep. And as the candlelight fades and this chapter comes to a close, we leave her at the threshold of a new life, one shaped not by romance, but by endurance. In the quiet darkness, where history meets sleep, the golden cage no longer glitters. It simply remains, solid and unyielding, a reminder that beauty and power have always come at a price.
Silence is not golden here. It is freezing. As you settle deeper into your blankets, imagine waking before dawn in January in the year 1300 inside a medieval stone castle. There is no insulation, no central hearth to warm every room, no gentle hum of modern comfort. The cold arrives first, before thought, before memory. Wind slides through cracks in the stone and slips behind heavy tapestries that were never meant to decorate, only to slow the air just enough to survive it. In this medieval sleep ambience, the castle is not a home, it is a refrigerator made of stone, vast and indifferent. A medieval princess opens her eyes and exhales, watching her own breath drift upward in pale clouds, even beneath layers of fur and silk. Castle life reality was shaped by temperature as much as by politics. The stone walls absorb warmth and refuse to release it, turning rooms into cold chambers where heat vanishes almost as soon as it is created. Fires burned constantly, yet they warmed only the space immediately around them. Step away, and the cold returns, sharp and unyielding. In this relaxing history documentary sleep story, we follow her slow movements through corridors that never truly warm, even in summer. Silk gowns offer beauty but little protection, and though furs were prized, they could not defeat damp air seeping from the walls. Cold castle sounds define her days and nights. The low moan of wind outside, the crackle of firewood struggling to survive, the echo of footsteps on stone floors chilled by centuries of winter. A princess spent a surprising portion of her life simply trying to stay warm. Hands stiffened, joints ached, skin cracked beneath perfume and powder. Sleep itself was shallow, interrupted by shivering that no amount of status could prevent. Medieval history for sleep often speaks of feasts and luxury, but rarely of numb fingers and frozen mornings. Baths were rare, not from neglect, but from necessity. Water was cold, heating it costly, and exposure dangerous. Dampness clung to everything: clothing, hair, lungs. Respiratory illness followed the cold like a shadow, and even royalty could not escape it. While you lie comfortably now, wrapped in warmth, this sensory contrast reveals the truth of medieval living. Comfort was not guaranteed by crowns. The castle did not care who you were. It took heat without favor and returned only silence. Over time, the cold shaped her body and her mind. Endurance became second nature. Complaints were pointless and weakness invisible. In a world where warmth was temporary and survival constant, resilience replaced comfort as the true luxury. As this chapter unfolds, let the contrast deepen. Feel the imagined chill, and then return to the safety of your bed. This is why stories like this help us sleep, not because they frighten us, but because they remind us how protected we are now. The medieval princess did not dream of grandeur when she woke. She dreamed of warmth. And that simple wish followed her through every stone corridor of her frozen world.
So, night inside a medieval stone castle was not a time of rest, but a longer negotiation with the cold. As darkness settled and the fires burned lower, the temperature dropped quietly, steadily, as if the walls themselves were exhaling winter. In this medieval sleep ambiance, a princess lay beneath layers of wool, fur, and linen, yet never fully warm. The bed, often raised high above the stone floor, was designed not for comfort but for survival, lifted away from the cold ground that swallowed heat without mercy. Still, the chill climbed upward, finding fingers, toes, the curve of the neck. Breath became visible again, drifting slowly in the dim light of a single candle. Cold castle sounds filled the night, the low whistle of wind slipping through arrow slits, the soft creak of timber beams contracting, the distant crack of ice forming in water jugs left too near the walls. Sleep came in fragments. Shivering woke her as often as dreams did. In this history documentary sleep story, we understand that night was when vulnerability felt closest. Guards patrolled corridors, but no one could patrol the cold. Illness often began here in the quiet hours before dawn, when damp air settled deep into the lungs. Coughs were hushed, not from politeness, but from habit. Noise traveled easily through stone, and privacy was rare. Even sleep felt observed by the castle itself. The princess learned to lie still, conserving warmth, minimizing movement, listening to her own heartbeat slow. There were no soft mattresses as we know them now. Straw, feathers, or horsehair filled the bedding, shifting beneath her weight, offering little insulation. Warmth was layered, earned inch by inch, not given freely. In medieval history for sleep, we often imagine silence as peace, but here silence carried tension. It meant the fire had died lower. It meant frost might form before morning. It meant another day would begin stiff and aching. Yet over time, the body adapted. The cold became familiar, almost expected. Discomfort faded into background awareness, replaced by endurance. This is where sensory contrast does its quiet work. As you lie warm now, perhaps barely aware of the temperature around you, her world reminds your body that safety is not universal and comfort is not guaranteed. The medieval princess did not fall asleep dreaming of luxury. She drifted off calculating warmth, positioning blankets, timing breaths. Even dreams were shaped by the cold, shorter, lighter, easily broken. When morning finally came, it arrived not with warmth, but with pale light and renewed effort. Rising from bed was an act of will. Fingers struggled with clasps and fabric. Breath caught sharply at first contact with air. And yet she rose, always, because the castle demanded it. As this part of the story unfolds, let your mind slow further. Let the imagined cold sharpen your awareness of the warmth you hold now. This contrast is why such stories calm the nervous system. They remind us that we are safe, sheltered, protected. The medieval night was long, and the stone never slept, but you can. And as her breath fogged the darkness centuries ago, yours can settle now, steady and warm, carrying you gently toward rest.
Morning in a medieval stone castle did not bring relief, it brought exposure. As the pale light crept through narrow windows, the cold revealed itself fully, no longer hidden by darkness. In this castle life reality, dawn meant rising from what little warmth the night allowed and stepping back into air that felt sharp against the skin. A medieval princess opened her eyes knowing that the hardest moment of the day had arrived. Leaving the bed was an act of discipline, not comfort. The stone floor waited patiently, holding the night's cold like a memory it refused to forget. In this medieval sleep ambiance, servants moved quietly, layering garments one by one, linen first, then wool, then silk, then fur. Each piece added not for beauty, but for survival. Even then, warmth was incomplete. Fingers remained stiff, breath remained visible. The castle did not soften with daylight. Fires were rekindled, but slowly, reluctantly, and the warmth lagged behind the duties of the day. History documentary sleep stories often skip these mornings, rushing toward events and intrigue. But for a medieval princess, this routine shaped her existence more than any single political moment. Cold castle sounds returned with daylight, doors groaning open, iron hinges protesting movement, footsteps echoing with hollow clarity. Breakfast was simple, functional, chosen to sustain rather than delight. The body consumed energy simply to maintain heat. Over years, this constant cold etched itself into posture and movement. Shoulders tensed unconsciously, hands stayed close to the body. Stillness became efficiency. The castle taught restraint without words. In medieval history for sleep, we see how environment becomes teacher. There was no escape from the stone. Even when she moved to a different chamber, or later a different court, the memory of cold traveled with her. It shaped expectations, patience, and endurance. Comfort was never assumed, it was always temporary. This is the deeper truth behind the freezing castle. It was not merely uncomfortable, it trained the mind.
It taught acceptance of hardship as normal. And so, when life demanded sacrifice, when fear appeared in other forms, the body already understood how to endure. As you lie warm now, perhaps barely aware of the temperature around you, this contrast gently reassures your nervous system. You are safe. You are protected. The morning you will wake to is not a test of survival. This awareness allows the mind to let go. The medieval princess could never fully relax into sleep because dawn always waited with cold hands. But you can. And as this chapter closes, imagine her standing quietly by a narrow window, watching frost fade from the stone as the day begins. The castle remains cold, unmoved by light or status, yet she stands, composed, enduring, shaped by an environment that never cared for comfort. This is where the illusion of luxury finally dissolves. The castle was grand, but it was never warm. And in understanding this, we find rest, not in the past, but in the gentle safety of the present moment. You are never alone. Let that idea settle gently as you rest. In medieval daily life, solitude was not a right, it was a risk. For a medieval princess, privacy simply did not exist. From the moment she woke, eyes were already upon her. Ladies in waiting entered quietly, not to intrude, but because intrusion was their duty. In this Princess Fact sleep story, we imagine her sitting up in bed as curtains are drawn back, hands reaching for garments before she has fully gathered her thoughts. They watched her dress layer by layer, not out of curiosity, but to ensure propriety, status, and control. Even prayer was rarely private. Kneeling alone could be misinterpreted. Silence itself could be suspicious. In royal bedroom history, the presence of others was constant, shaping not only her behavior, but her inner world. To be a princess was to live inside a shared space where nothing truly belonged to you, not even your thoughts. Ladies slept at the foot of her bed, listening to her breathe, noting restlessness, whispers, dreams spoken aloud. Night offered no escape. In this boring History Channel style of truth, we understand that surveillance was woven into care. These women were companions, guards, informants, and witnesses all at once. They reported routines, moods, changes in appetite, expressions of fatigue. A sigh could become a story. A pause in conversation could be interpreted as defiance. Every word was weighed before being spoken because sound traveled quickly in stone halls and even faster through human mouths. Medieval history for sleep often paints court life as elegant and refined, but the reality was tense, layered with observation. A princess learned early that privacy was dangerous. Being alone meant being unprotected. Being unseen meant being vulnerable to rumor. So she accepted the constant presence, adapted to it, shaped herself around it. Her body language became controlled. Her expressions softened into neutrality. Emotion learned to hide behind stillness. Even the most intimate human acts were witnessed. Eating, bathing, using the chamber pot, moments that modern life guards fiercely, unfolded in company. Not because of cruelty, but because the body of a princess was not private property. It belonged to the crown, to lineage, to politics. This is the introvert's nightmare made historical. A life where silence is never empty and solitude never safe. Yet over time, the mind adjusted. Inner privacy replaced outer privacy. Thoughts retreated inward, carefully guarded. Dreams became quieter. Reflection happened in fragments, between footsteps and whispered instructions. As you lie comfortably now, perhaps alone, perhaps surrounded by quiet you chose, this contrast does its gentle work. Your nervous system recognizes safety in absence, calm in silence. The medieval princess never knew this luxury. Her world was shared at every breath. And as this chapter opens fully, we begin to understand that the greatest loss of her life was not freedom of movement, but freedom of being unseen. Let that understanding carry you deeper into rest, knowing that tonight you are allowed to disappear into sleep without witnesses.
In a medieval court, silence did not mean peace, it meant listening. For a medieval princess, every quiet moment carried the weight of unseen ears and unspoken judgment. Whispers traveled faster than footsteps, slipping beneath doors and climbing stone staircases with ease. In this medieval daily life sleep story, we imagine her seated at a long table, hands folded, eyes lowered, while conversation flows around her like a river she must never disturb. A single misplaced word could ripple outward, changing its shape with every retelling. This is where zero privacy became most dangerous, not because of what she did, but because of what others imagined. Royal bedroom history tells us that gossip was not idle entertainment, it was currency. A look held too long, a laugh heard at the wrong time, a moment of fatigue mistaken for discontent. All could be transformed into narratives of disloyalty or ambition. In a boring History Channel style of calm truth, we understand that surveillance did not always come from guards or attendants, but from expectation itself. The court watched for meaning everywhere, because meaning justified power. The princess learned to live inside a narrow emotional range, neither too warm nor too cold, neither too engaged nor too distant. Emotional neutrality became protection. Sleep offered little escape from this awareness. Even in rest, the mind remained alert, listening for footsteps, voices, the subtle shift in atmosphere that signaled scrutiny. Dreams were brief, shallow, interrupted by the instinct to remain composed even while unconscious. In medieval history for sleep, this constant vigilance is rarely discussed, yet it shaped daily existence more than ceremony ever could. Privacy of thought became the only remaining refuge. She learned to think quietly, to separate inner truth from outer expression. Thoughts slowed, softened, hidden behind practiced calm. Over time, this internal retreat created distance even from herself. The line between performance and identity blurred. Was she acting or simply surviving? This question lingered without answer. As rumors circulated, the princess rarely confronted them. Defense only drew attention. Silence was safer, though it came at a cost. The body held tension without release. Shoulders tightened, breath shortened. Calm became a posture rather than a feeling. In this sensory contrast, your body now can relax into stillness without fear of misinterpretation. Your silence belongs to you. No one listens for hidden meaning in your breath. The medieval princess never experienced this relief. Her world was filled with watchers who believed they were protecting the crown, even as they eroded the self beneath it. And yet, within this constant observation, she endured. The mind adapts even to being seen at all times. Inner space becomes sacred precisely because it is invisible. As this part of the story unfolds, let your awareness drift inward where no whispers follow. This is where rest begins, not in the absence of sound, but in the absence of judgment. The medieval court never slept, but tonight you can.
There was one final place where privacy might have lived, and even that was taken. The body of a medieval princess was never truly her own. In medieval daily life, the royal body was a public matter, observed, discussed, evaluated with quiet precision. In this Princess Facts sleep story, imagine how every physical detail became meaningful. Appetite was noted. Complexion was examined. Monthly cycles, though spoken of indirectly, were carefully tracked by attendants and physicians. Health was not personal, it was political. In royal bedroom history, even illness carried implications. A fever could delay negotiations. Weakness could spark rumors. Fertility was watched most closely of all because it defined her worth in a world ruled by lineage. Ladies-in-waiting assisted with bathing, dressing, undressing, tending to the most intimate needs without pause or apology. The chamber pot was never truly private. Curtains offered illusion, not solitude. Someone was always near, listening, waiting, witnessing. This was not cruelty, it was system. A structure built on control and continuity. The medieval princess learned to detach from her own body, to treat it as something managed rather than lived in. Sensation became muted, discomfort normalized, modesty shifted from privacy to obedience. In medieval history for sleep, we often focus on external restriction, but this internal separation may have been the greatest cost. When the body is always seen, it stops feeling like a refuge, it becomes territory. Over time, the princess stopped expecting solitude even in pain. Childbirth, the most vulnerable experience imaginable, unfolded before witnesses, midwives, nobles, sometimes even clergy, all present to ensure legitimacy, to confirm heirs, to record outcomes. Suffering was endured quietly. Expression was discouraged. Silence was praised as strength. As you rest now, this contrast becomes gentle reassurance. Your body belongs to you. Your discomfort is private. Your rest is unwatched. The medieval princess never had this certainty. Her body existed for others long before it existed for herself. And yet, within this constant exposure, she survived. Adaptation became instinct. Awareness narrowed inward. The self retreated inward again, to places no eyes could reach. This is how she endured a life without privacy, not by resisting observation, but by becoming invisible within it. As this chapter closes, allow your awareness to return fully to your own body, safely unseen, held only by warmth and quiet. The medieval world demanded visibility. The modern night offers disappearance. Let that be your comfort now, as we gently step away from the watching eyes of the past and prepare to enter the next chapter, where the loss of privacy becomes something else entirely, the loss of choice.
Your wedding day was never meant to be yours. Let that truth settle slowly, like evening fog. In royal marriage history, love was a story told to others, never to the bride herself. For a medieval princess, marriage began long before memory. At the age when childhood should have been light and unburdened, negotiations were already underway. In this sleep narration of sad history stories, imagine being 4 years old, playing quietly, unaware that men you would never meet were already discussing your future in distant halls. Names were spoken, borders considered, armies weighed. You were not present, yet everything was about you. Arranged marriage medieval customs treated the princess not as a person, but as a solution, a peace treaty wrapped in velvet, a promise of silence between warring lands. This was not cruelty in the medieval mind, it was order, stability, survival. And so the agreement was signed, sometimes years before you could read your own name. As you grew, the knowledge followed you like a shadow you could not outrun. One day you would leave. The timing was uncertain, but the outcome was fixed. In medieval history for sleep, this certainty carries a particular sadness. Not sharp, not dramatic, but heavy and dull, like resignation settling into the bones. You learned not to ask where you were going. Curiosity only deepened the ache. You learned the language of distance before learning the language of love. When the time finally came, preparation replaced reflection. The carriage waited, padded and ornate, yet unmistakably final. You were dressed carefully, not for comfort, but for presentation. Each layer of fabric was a reminder of what you represented. The journey away from home was quiet. No speeches, no protests, only the sound of wheels turning over stone roads, carrying you farther from everything familiar. The heavy curtains of the carriage absorbed your tears just as they absorbed sound. This silence was expected. A princess did not grieve aloud. Grief might suggest doubt, and doubt threatened the agreement. In this boring History Channel style of calm truth, we recognize that emotional resignation was not weakness, it was adaptation. To survive such a departure, the heart learned to close gently, not all at once, but piece by piece. Memory became softer, faces blurred, attachment loosened. By the time the foreign horizon appeared, you had already begun to disappear from your former life. This is the quiet tragedy of royal marriage history, not the wedding itself, but the slow erasure that came before it. As you lie here now, safe in stillness, this contrast does its gentle work. You are not being sent away. No one has signed your future without your presence. The medieval princess never knew this peace. Her path was drawn long before her footsteps touched it. And as this chapter opens, we rest with the understanding that sometimes the most profound loss is not sudden, but planned carefully, signed in ink, and carried out in silence.
The journey did not end when the carriage stopped. It simply changed shape. In royal marriage history, arrival at a foreign court marked the beginning of a quieter loss. As the gates opened and unfamiliar banners stirred in the cold air, the medieval princess stepped into a world that did not know her voice, her habits, or her memories. In this sleep narration, shaped by sad history stories, imagine how language itself became a wall. Words sounded different, carried unfamiliar rhythms, and meaning slipped away before it could settle. She smiled when expected, nodded when uncertain, and learned quickly that confusion was best hidden behind composure. Arranged marriage medieval life demanded adaptation without complaint. The court observed her closely, not with cruelty, but with expectation. Every gesture was measured against custom, every silence interpreted. Home was now a place she could not return to, and belonging became conditional. In medieval daily life, the new household did not pause to mourn what she had lost. Duties resumed immediately, ceremonies followed, introductions blurred together, names were learned and forgotten in the same breath. Loneliness did not announce itself loudly, it arrived gradually, in moments between obligations, in the space after applause faded, in the hours before sleep when the mind wandered back to places it was no longer allowed to miss openly. This emotional resignation deepened over time. The princess understood that longing was dangerous. Nostalgia softened resolve. So she learned to keep her heart quiet, to let memories dim naturally rather than resist their fading. In medieval history for sleep, this adaptation reads as calm, but beneath it lay a steady ache. The husband she was given was not an enemy, but rarely a companion. The marriage was designed to function, not to comfort. Affection, if it appeared, was formal and restrained. Privacy remained scarce. Observation followed her even here, ensuring loyalty, fertility, and compliance. Nights were especially heavy. The bed was larger, the chamber grander, yet the sense of absence grew sharper. She listened to unfamiliar sounds, a new city breathing around her, and realized that grief had no language here. Tears were swallowed before they formed. The court valued stability above emotion. In this boring History Channel tone of truth, we recognize that survival in such a place required emotional economy. Feelings were spent carefully. Hope was rationed. Over time, resignation settled into routine. Days repeated. Seasons changed. The foreign became familiar, though never intimate. This is the hidden cost of royal marriage history. Not the loss of freedom alone, but the quiet erosion of self that followed relocation. As you rest now, the contrast becomes a gentle anchor. You are not required to adapt to survive. Your silence is chosen, not enforced. The medieval princess lived a life where acceptance was the only path forward. And as this part draws to a close, we remain with her in that foreign court, steady, composed, carrying a silent heart through corridors that would never echo her past.
Long before the vows were spoken, the life of a medieval princess had already been exchanged. In royal marriage history, signatures mattered more than promises, seals more than feelings. In this sleep narration of sad history stories, imagine parchment laid out on a heavy table, ink drying slowly as men discussed borders, dowries, and succession. Somewhere far away, a child played quietly, unaware that her future had just been finalized. This was the moment her life stopped being a possibility and became an arrangement. Arranged marriage medieval systems were efficient, not kind. They reduced human lives into clauses and conditions. Once signed, there was no reversal. Time moved forward, indifferent to emotion. As the princess grew older, that invisible contract followed her everywhere, shaping decisions she never made. She was educated for departure, trained for adaptation, praised for obedience. Love was never part of the agreement. In medieval history for sleep, this realization carries a deep stillness, not anger, not rebellion, but acceptance. By the time the wedding day arrived, resistance had already faded. The ceremony itself was brief, formal, carefully choreographed to reflect unity rather than individuality. Applause filled the hall, yet the meaning belonged elsewhere, in ledgers and alliances, not in hearts. From that day on, her identity shifted. She became a link, a guarantee, a living document that proved the treaty was real. The role demanded consistency. Feelings were secondary. Duty became routine. Over time, the idea of choice felt distant, almost fictional. She did not remember deciding anything important for herself, and eventually she stopped expecting to. This was not despair, it was resignation refined into calm. In the foreign court, days passed quietly. Seasons changed without ceremony. Birthdays were acknowledged politely, then forgotten. Letters from home grew infrequent, then stopped. The world moved on, as it always does, leaving her fixed in place. In this boring History Channel tone of truth, we see how the greatest loss was subtle. Not freedom taken away violently, but freedom never offered. The medieval princess did not feel cheated because she had never been promised anything else. Her life unfolded exactly as designed. As you rest now, this contrast offers gentle release. Your life is not bound by ink signed before your memory began. Your future is not sealed without your presence. The medieval princess lived within boundaries drawn by others and learned to survive by staying still within them.
As this chapter closes, we let her rest there, composed in quiet, a life signed away but endured with dignity. And as her story fades into the soft darkness of history, you were free to drift into sleep, knowing that your stillness tonight is chosen, not required.
Beauty was not light. It was heavy, pressing down on the body from the moment you dressed until the moment you were finally undressed at night. In medieval fashion history, clothing was not designed for movement or comfort, but for display, status, and endurance. In this ASMR history sleep learning story, imagine the sensation of waking and knowing that weight would soon return. Your dress alone could weigh 20 pounds or more, layers of wool, linen, and velvet stitched tightly together, stiff with age and rarely washed. The fabric scraped softly against the skin, trapping heat and moisture beneath it. Dangerous beauty history tells us that noblewomen were expected to look effortless, even as their bodies labored under constant strain. The medieval princess became a statue in motion, every step measured, every movement slowed by gravity and expectation. To appear pale and refined, powders made from white lead were applied carefully to the face. The effect was admired, the cost was invisible. Over time, the poison seeped into the skin, causing sores, hair loss, and illness that no one openly connected to beauty itself. In medieval daily life, discomfort was normalized. Itching beneath the layers was ignored. Sweat gathered quietly. Parasites thrived where warmth and fabric met skin. Lice beneath gold was not metaphor, but routine. Yet the smile remained. In royal courts, appearance was language. To look composed meant loyalty, health, and control. Any sign of distress risked interpretation, so the body endured. Fashion shaped posture, slowed breath, narrowed the range of motion. Sitting, standing, even breathing required awareness. This is the gross truth hidden beneath embroidered surfaces, not dramatic suffering, but constant irritation, pressure, and restraint. As you rest now, wrapped in light fabric, barely aware of what touches your skin, this contrast gently grounds the mind. The medieval princess carried her status physically, hour after hour, day after day. Clothing was armor, signal, and cage all at once. And as this chapter opens, we begin to understand that beauty in the medieval world was not something worn lightly. It was something carried, patiently, silently, until the body learned to move within it.
Beneath the silk, beneath the embroidery, beneath the careful illusion of refinement, the medieval body told a very different story. In medieval fashion history, garments were rarely washed, not from neglect, but from limitation. Water was cold, heating it expensive, and frequent washing damaged precious fabrics. In this ASMR history sleep learning narrative, imagine wearing the same layers for days, sometimes weeks, absorbing sweat, oils, dust, and the residue of daily life. The smell was not sharp, but persistent, a dull presence that clung to cloth and skin alike. Dangerous beauty history reveals that perfumes were not worn for pleasure, but for camouflage. Herbs, resins, and floral oils were applied to mask what could not be removed. The medieval princess learned to exist inside these layers, breathing carefully, moving slowly, accepting sensations modern life has erased. Itching became background noise. Heat built quietly beneath wool and velvet, especially in crowded halls where fires burned constantly. Lice thrived where hair was rarely washed and warmth never escaped. They were treated not as scandal, but as inevitability. Scratching was done discreetly. Discomfort was managed through posture and stillness. In medieval daily life, cleanliness was a relative concept, shaped by environment rather than desire. Baths existed but were infrequent, communal, and often avoided in winter. Cold air on wet skin invited illness, so the body remained enclosed, protected from exposure, even if it meant carrying the consequences. Royal courts valued appearance above hygiene. To look immaculate mattered more than to feel clean. In royal bedroom history, attendants assisted with dressing, adjusting layers, applying powders and scents, ensuring the illusion held. The princess became accustomed to the sensation of being slightly uncomfortable at all times. This constant mild distress trained the nervous system to ignore signals, to prioritize composure over sensation. Over time, numbness replaced irritation. The body learned to endure quietly. This is the gross truth that feels oddly calming when heard at night. Not because it is pleasant, but because it contrasts so sharply with the present. As you lie here now, clean, warm, surrounded by fresh air and washed fabric, your body recognizes safety. The medieval princess never experienced this baseline. Her comfort was temporary, borrowed, fragile. Clothing was not something she changed easily, it was something she inhabited. And as this part continues, we understand that fashion in the medieval world was not an expression of self, but a condition of existence. Beauty was maintained not through care, but through tolerance, and tolerance, over time, reshaped what the body believed was normal. What made the weight of fashion truly unbearable was not the heaviness of cloth alone, but the expectation that it would never be acknowledged. In medieval fashion history, discomfort was invisible by design. A medieval princess was trained from childhood to wear pain gracefully, to let beauty erase the evidence of strain. In this ASMR history sleep learning story, imagine standing for hours in a stiff gown, shoulders aching, breath shallow, while conversation flows as if nothing presses down on you. Dangerous beauty history shows us that suffering was reframed as elegance. A still body signaled discipline. A calm expression suggested virtue. The smile was not optional, it was part of the garment. Even as heat pooled beneath layers and itching demanded attention, the face remained composed. This emotional labor compounded the physical burden. Not only did the body endure, but the mind had to pretend it was effortless. In medieval daily life, this performance was constant. Public appearances blurred together, each requiring the same posture, the same restraint. Sitting did not bring relief. Chairs were hard, backs straight, garments bunching and pulling with every shift of weight. Standing offered no escape either. The dress dragged downward, reminding the body of gravity with every breath. Over time, the princess learned to move less. Stillness reduced discomfort. Silence preserved energy. This is the quiet strategy beneath the surface of royal life. In royal bedroom history, even moments of supposed rest were structured. Clothing was removed slowly, layer by layer, in the presence of attendants. Skin marked by pressure lines and irritation was quickly covered again by night garments. There was no moment to simply exist without fabric. The body never forgot its role. This constant containment shaped identity. To be beautiful meant to endure without complaint. Pain became private, then unnoticeable. The medieval princess did not ask whether this was fair. Fairness was irrelevant. The standard existed, and she adapted to it. As you listen now, the contrast works gently on the nervous system. Your body is allowed to soften. Your clothing does not demand performance. Your face does not need to signal virtue. The medieval world required the body to be convincing at all times. Tonight, you are allowed to be unobserved. This chapter closes not with rebellion, but with understanding. Fashion was not chosen, it was imposed, heavy with meaning and expectation. The princess smiled beneath it because she had learned there was no alternative. And as her image fades into history, weighed down yet composed, you are free to let go of your own tension, to rest without display, and to drift towards sleep knowing that beauty no longer requires endurance.
The most dangerous battlefield in a medieval princess's life was not marked by banners or steel, but by quiet preparation and hushed prayers. In the history of childbirth, especially within royal walls, danger arrived without warning and lingered without mercy. In this women history sleep narrative, imagine the slow passing of months as pregnancy advanced, each day carrying both hope and unease. Medieval medicine understood little of infection, hygiene, or internal trauma. What it did understand was ritual. As the time approached, the birthing chamber was prepared like a threshold between worlds. Curtains were drawn, candles were lit, relics and charms were placed carefully, not for comfort, but for protection. In medieval daily life, childbirth was treated as an ordeal to be endured. The princess knew the stories. She had watched other women disappear behind closed doors and never return. She had seen the aftermath carried quietly through corridors. In royal households, pregnancy was celebrated publicly, yet feared privately. Queens and princesses wrote wills before labor began, not as a gesture of pessimism, but of realism. The odds were not in their favor. In medieval medicine, even healthy births carried high risk. Bleeding could not be controlled. Infections spread invisibly. Pain was expected, managed through prayer and endurance rather than relief. The birthing chamber, meant to bring life, was heavy with anticipation and restraint. The princess was not alone, yet profoundly isolated. Midwives attended her closely, experienced but limited by the knowledge of their time. Noblewomen and attendants filled the room, witnesses to both possibility and peril. Privacy did not exist here either. The body was once again a public matter, its success or failure tied to the fate of kingdoms. In the history of childbirth, this pressure added weight to every breath. The princess understood that her value was measured in outcomes. An heir meant survival, legitimacy, stability. Failure meant disappointment at best, disaster at worst. In relaxing voiceover tradition, we lower the intensity gently now, recognizing the emotional toll of such expectation. Fear was constant, but it could not be spoken aloud. To express doubt was to invite blame. So the princess learned to carry fear silently, to breathe through it, to meet the storm with stillness. This is the high-stakes truth of medieval women's history. Life and death balanced on moments no one could fully control. As you listen now, safe and distant from this uncertainty, the contrast offers reassurance. Modern medicine has transformed this battlefield into a place of care. The medieval princess never knew that security. Her courage was quiet, her endurance assumed. And as this chapter opens, we sit with her on the edge of that chamber, where hope and danger shared the same narrow doorway.
The most exhausting part of danger was not the moment itself, but the waiting that came before it. In the history of childbirth, anticipation carried its own weight, pressing on the mind long before labor began. In this women history sleep narration, imagine the weeks stretching slowly, each day marked by careful observation and restrained concern. Every ache was noted, every change in breath was watched. The medieval princess lived under constant evaluation, her body becoming a calendar others read closely. Medieval medicine offered little reassurance. Prognosis relied on omens, past outcomes, and quiet prayer rather than certainty. So waiting filled the space where knowledge should have been. In royal households, this waiting was shared but unequal. Advisors discussed succession in hushed tones. Attendants prepared linens and herbs repeatedly, rehearsing for an event that might end in celebration or mourning. The princess herself waited in silence, her role requiring composure even as uncertainty grew heavier. In medieval daily life, fear was managed through routine. Meals were taken on schedule. Prayers were repeated at set hours. Normality was maintained to keep dread contained. Yet beneath this structure, the mind wandered. Thoughts returned to stories heard in childhood, of women who survived and women who did not. Survival was never guaranteed, only hoped for. In the history of childbirth, this ambiguity shaped emotional life. Joy and fear existed side by side, neither allowed full expression. To hope too openly invited disappointment. To fear too deeply threatened stability. So emotions were held in balance, muted and contained. The princess learned to rest in this narrow space. Nights were especially long. Sleep came lightly, interrupted by awareness of the body and its unpredictable rhythms. In relaxing voiceover tradition, we slow the pace here, acknowledging how vigilance drains the spirit. The birthing chamber loomed not as a room, but as a moment approaching inevitably. Conversations softened around her. The court treated her with gentle formality, a subtle shift that acknowledged risk without naming it. In medieval women's history, this period of waiting was a quiet trial. There was no action to take, no choice to make, only endurance. This endurance was expected, praised, and rarely remembered. The princess did not ask for comfort. Comfort was uncertain. Instead, she practiced stillness, letting time pass through her rather than resisting it. As you listen now, the contrast offers relief. Your waiting, if it exists, is not bound to life or death in the same way. Modern knowledge fills the space where fear once lived. The medieval princess waited without that light. Her courage was measured not in dramatic acts, but in patience. And as this part draws to a close, we remain with her in that suspended time, where every breath mattered, and where hope learned to move quietly so it would not break under its own weight.
When the moment finally arrived, there was no ceremony, no warning bell, only urgency wrapped in ritual. In the history of childbirth, the line between life and death was crossed quietly, without spectacle. In this relaxing voiceover of women's history, imagine the birthing chamber closing off from the rest of the world, sound muffled by stone and cloth. Outside, the court waited. Inside, time lost its meaning. Medieval medicine could offer encouragement, prayers, and tradition, but not certainty. Hours stretched into exhaustion. Pain ebbed and returned in waves, measured not by clocks, but by breath. The princess was surrounded by voices, yet profoundly alone within her own body. In medieval daily life, success or failure was determined in silence.
When a child cried, relief spread cautiously, never fully certain until the mother breathed again. Even then, danger lingered. Infection, hemorrhage, fever could arrive days later, turning celebration into mourning without warning. In royal households, contingency plans were always ready. If the mother survived, she was praised for strength she had no choice but to show. If she did not, the court adapted swiftly. Mourning followed structure, life continued. This is the hardest truth in medieval women's history. Individual lives were fragile, but systems endured. The princess understood this long before labor began. Her role did not end with survival. It continued with recovery, expectation, and often repetition. Pregnancy followed pregnancy, each one reopening the same risks. Some women endured many births, others survived only one. Memory of pain faded just enough for duty to resume. In medieval history for sleep, this cycle feels distant, yet its emotional weight remains. Courage was not celebrated loudly, it was assumed. The body was thanked only if it succeeded. If it failed, silence closed around it. As this chapter draws to a close, we allow the intensity to soften. The birthing chamber fades into history, leaving behind a deeper appreciation for the safety of the present. Modern medicine has transformed childbirth from a gamble into care. The medieval princess lived without that assurance. Her bravery was quiet, woven into expectation, never framed as choice. As you rest now, your breath steady and unobserved, let this contrast ease your mind. The past was heavy with risk. The present offers shelter. And as we move gently forward, leaving behind the echoes of the birthing chamber, we prepare to enter the next chapter, where danger no longer comes in moments, but lingers across entire lifetimes.
When danger faded from view, something heavier took its place: time. In medieval entertainment history, silence was not peaceful, and stillness was not rest. It was repetition without relief. In this boring history for insomnia style of calming story, imagine waking each morning to the same gray light filtering through narrow windows, unchanged by season or mood. The medieval princess did not rush. There was nowhere to go. Her day unfolded slowly, predictably, with no urgency and no surprise. Embroidery filled the hours, not as creative expression, but as obligation. Hands moved while the mind drifted, tracing patterns already memorized long ago. Prayers followed, spoken in the same order at the same times every day. Meals arrived on schedule, identical in rhythm, if not always in taste. Conversation was polite and shallow, carefully contained within acceptable topics. In medieval daily life, boredom was not a break from stimulation, it was the absence of stimulation altogether. There was no news feed to refresh, no letters arriving frequently, no private books meant for pleasure. Reading, when permitted, was limited and purposeful, not an escape, but a duty. Time did not pass quickly. It pruled, it stretched, it pressed down gently but endlessly. The princess felt it in the long afternoons when sunlight barely shifted on the stone floor, and in the evenings when candles burned slowly, marking hours that seemed to resist movement. In medieval history documentaries, court life is often shown as lively and dramatic, but the truth was quieter. Most days were empty of event. That emptiness was not relaxing, it was suffocating. The mind had nowhere to wander safely. Imagination was dangerous, desire was discouraged, so thought slowed to match the pace of the day. This is the ultimate sleep trigger hidden in history, a life where stimulation was so scarce that awareness itself softened.
Over time, boredom reshaped consciousness. Attention narrowed, days blurred together. Memory lost sharp edges. Without contrast, everything became flat. The princess did not count days. There was no reason to. Weeks passed unnoticed. Months followed the same pattern. This eternal sameness was not punishment, it was structure. Order preserved stability, but at the cost of vitality. In this calming story tone, we allow that monotony to settle gently. The rhythm of repetition becomes almost hypnotic. Stitch after stitch, prayer after prayer, breath after breath. And as you listen now, that rhythm quietly invites your own mind to slow, to release the need for novelty, to rest inside a world where nothing changes and nothing is required.
As days repeated without distinction, time itself began to lose its shape. In medieval entertainment history, there were no markers to divide one moment from the next beyond bells and ritual. In this boring history for insomnia calming story, imagine how hours drifted together, indistinguishable, softened by sameness. The medieval princess did not anticipate events because there were few. She did not recall yesterday clearly because it resembled today too closely. Without novelty, memory thinned, attention slowed, thoughts arrived, lingered briefly, and faded without urgency. This was not peace, it was dullness settling into the mind like dust. In medieval daily life, emotional restraint paired with monotony to create a quiet numbness. Feelings did not rise sharply enough to demand action. Joy was muted, sadness flattened, desire lost its edge. The court moved at a deliberate pace, reinforcing this internal stillness. Bells rang to signal prayer, meals, rest, and sleep, yet even these sounds blended into a single continuous hum. In history documentary sleep narration, this state is rarely explored, but it defined much of aristocratic existence. The princess learned to occupy herself without engagement. Embroidery continued, though patterns no longer required attention. Words of prayer passed through the mouth without reaching thought. Conversation filled space without conveying meaning. The body remained upright, composed, present, while the mind drifted inward, slowing with each passing hour. Time without edges created a strange safety. Nothing unexpected happened, but that safety came at the cost of vitality. Without contrast, the nervous system relaxed too deeply, settling into passive endurance. This is the contagious boredom that gently pulls the listener downward. Not boredom that irritates, but boredom that sedates. The kind that lowers heart rate, softens focus, and blurs awareness. In medieval history for sleep, this was an unspoken condition. The princess did not complain of it because it was invisible. There was no language for mental fatigue caused by endless calm. Instead, the mind adapted by dimming itself. Days became longer, yet felt shorter because nothing distinguished them. The passage of time ceased to feel like movement and became more like stillness. As you listen now, this sensation may feel familiar. The rhythm of the story slows your thoughts. The absence of urgency invites rest. The medieval princess lived inside this tempo every day. For her, boredom was not occasional, it was continuous. And as this part draws toward its close, we remain suspended in that flattened time, where nothing begins sharply and nothing ends clearly, allowing awareness to drift gently, unresisted, toward sleep. Eventually, boredom ceased to feel an interruption and became the structure of life itself. In medieval entertainment history, repetition was not an accident. It was intention. The medieval princess lived a life carefully designed to change as little as possible. In this boring history for insomnia calming story, imagine years passing without landmarks, seasons shifting while routines remained untouched. Birthdays were acknowledged with polite words and small rituals, then absorbed back into the same unbroken pattern. Nothing built toward a climax, nothing resolved. Life did not move forward so much as it circled. This was a life lived on repeat. The same prayers spoken in the same order, the same corridors walked at the same pace, the same faces appearing daily with the same expressions. Without novelty, anticipation faded. Without surprise, motivation softened. The mind learned to conserve energy by lowering expectation. In medieval daily life, this was stability. The court valued predictability because predictability reduced risk. A calm princess was a controllable princess. Over time, the princess's inner world adapted to match the outer stillness. Thoughts became fewer, longer, slower. Days were endured rather than experienced. Even memory adjusted, retaining only what was necessary to continue the routine. This is the quiet truth behind the glitter of court life shown in history documentaries. The drama existed in brief episodes. The majority of life was empty space between them. This emptiness was not filled with reflection or freedom, but with waiting. Waiting for the next meal, the next prayer, the next expected appearance. Waiting without anticipation. Waiting without end. In this state, boredom became almost soothing. The nervous system settled into a low, steady rhythm. The body moved through days without resistance. Awareness softened to the point where time felt distant. This is why contagious boredom works as an ultimate sleep trigger. It mirrors the mental state the body enters before sleep, when stimulation drops and vigilance dissolves. The medieval princess lived permanently at that threshold. There was no escape from repetition, so resistance faded. Acceptance replaced effort. This acceptance was not happiness, but it was calm, a calm enforced by sameness. As you listen now, this calm may feel heavy, but it is also releasing. Your mind recognizes the rhythm and follows it downward. The princess did not have the option to break the pattern. You do. And yet, for this moment, you are invited to rest inside it, knowing you can leave whenever you wish. As this chapter closes, the castle corridors grow quieter. The prayers end. The embroidery is set aside. Time stretches out, wide and gray, with nothing urgent inside it. The medieval princess remains there, living the same day again, while you drift gently away, carrying only the softness of slowed thought and the permission to sleep.
So tonight, as this story gently comes to rest, allow yourself a moment of quiet gratitude. In this sleep meditation history closing, we release the medieval world without urgency or judgment. The cold stone walls no longer surround you. The heavy doors have closed, not to trap, but to protect what remains behind them. The princess stays where she belongs, inside history, inside memory, inside a time that no longer reaches you. You are here in the present, wrapped in warmth, breathing easily. In calming voice sleep narration, we remind the mind that the danger has passed, the waiting has ended, and the long repetition has dissolved. The castle corridors fade into darkness, their echoes softening until they are indistinguishable from silence. The weight of expectation lifts. No one watches. No one listens. There is nothing required of you. This is the gift of distance.
History remains intact, but it no longer presses against your thoughts. In medieval history for sleep, closure is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet. It is release. The fire in the great hall burns lower now, settling into glowing embers that no longer demand attention. Snow drifts down beyond the walls, not as threat, but as hush. Time slows even further, stretching into something gentle and harmless. In this final chapter, boredom transforms into calm, and calm transforms into rest. The mind recognizes safety through repetition and warmth, through stillness that asks for nothing. This is why we end here, not with tragedy, but with peace. The medieval princess fades softly into the background, becoming part of the distant past, while your awareness drifts forward, lighter, unburdened. As the story loosens its grip, your thoughts may wander without shape or direction. Let them. There is no need to follow them. There is no need to stay awake. History sleeps now, and it invites you to do the same. Wrapped in your blankets, supported by the quiet, you are free to drift away, knowing that this world, unlike hers, allows rest without consequence.
Now, gently, we step away from the castle itself. In this calming sleep passage, the medieval world loosens its final threads. You no longer stand near the stone walls, and you no longer hear the muted sounds of court life behind them. The gates are distant now, blurred by darkness and snow, until even their outline disappears. In medieval history for sleep, this moment is not an ending, but a transition. The story does not stop, it simply releases you. The air around you grows softer, warmer, quieter. The weight of centuries lifts from your shoulders. You are no longer carrying the silence, the repetition, or the waiting. Those belong to history. Your body recognizes the difference immediately. Muscles relax without instruction. Breathing deepens on its own. The mind, no longer tethered to narrative, begins to drift freely. Thoughts slow and stretch, losing urgency, losing edges. This is the space where falling asleep fast becomes effortless. There is nothing left to process, no lesson to remember, no image to hold. The medieval princess remains safely behind, folded into the past, while you move forward into something unstructured and kind. In this end-screen sleep atmosphere, awareness narrows gently, like candlelight shrinking before it fades. Sounds soften, sensations blur. The boundary between listening and dreaming thins until it is barely there at all. You may notice moments slipping away without notice. This is natural. This is rest arriving. In medieval history for sleep, the final gift is perspective. You are free from that world, and free now from this one as well, for a little while. Let the story dissolve completely. Let the voice become background, then silence. There is no need to follow another thought. Sleep does not require effort. It happens when the mind is allowed to let go. And here, in this quiet space beyond history, you are allowed to let go completely.
And now, there is nothing left to hold on to. The story has done what it came to do. In this final, calming voice sleep moment, even the idea of history grows distant. The medieval world no longer asks for your attention. It does not need to be remembered tonight. The princess is no longer a figure to observe, analyze, or pity. She rests quietly in the past, where time no longer moves forward. Here,
In the present, your body is allowed to be heavy, supported, and still. Your breathing finds its own slow rhythm, unforced and steady. Thoughts no longer need to finish themselves. If one appears, it drifts away before taking shape. This is not forgetting. This is rest. In sleep meditation history, the final release is gentle acceptance. You do not need to stay alert. You do not need to listen closely. The voice fades naturally into the background, becoming part of the quiet rather than something separate from it. Sensation softens further. The edges of awareness blur. The room around you becomes less defined, less important. What remains is warmth, safety, and the simple presence of being here. Falling asleep fast is no longer a goal. Sleep is already happening, moment by moment, breath by breath. History sleeps. The castle sleeps. The long centuries of waiting dissolve into stillness, and you are free to follow them, downward, into a place without stories, without effort, without time. There is nothing else coming, nothing you need to prepare for. This is the end, and it is quiet. Good night.